I was here for the presentation that preceded this one, and I'm struck at the difference that there is between this topic and those very specific topics. I very much enjoyed those, and I hope you'll enjoy hearing about demography. They're different, yet I'm hoping you will see how you could juxtapose the two or use the two together and make some general conclusions about trends in Africa. The nice thing about demography is, one, that all the data that I'll present today is available to you on the web through the UN Population Division or an alternative site, the U.S. Census Bureau's International Program Center, the international database. And secondly, there are projections that we can look into the future in terms of demography, in terms of all kinds of things about demography, in terms of mortality, fertility, and to a lesser degree, migration. And up to about 20 years, the data are very, very good. That is future data. You can look into the future a couple decades and get a very good idea about where countries are going. And demographers do this all the time. And it's spurned actually two fields. One of them is economic demography and the other is political demography, and I'm a political demographer. So I hope to show you at first a little glimpse of just the standard demography of the continent. And secondly, whoops, don't have my presentation here.
Just
oh, is it?
Right arrow, yes.
Oh, okay. You got
do it
your
one more
little,
time. There.
what did I bounced it off some, I should be shooting up there, huh? Okay. So I've got 3 questions that I'll try to address. And I forgot my glasses, so I have to read them up here. How do demographers characterize, I can't do that, right. Okay, how do demographers characterize Africa's demographic transition? In other words, how is demography changing on the continent in terms of its progress and its uniformity? It's a big continent. East and West, North and South Africa, as I noted you've called the attention to speakers, are very different places. So how do they differ? Secondly, how have recent disturbances, particularly HIV/AIDS and civil conflict, affected African demographics? And thirdly, what do African regional demographic trends suggest about Africa's future? And the third question is really a political demographic question. In other words, political demographers will suggest that demographics can be associated with different kinds of state behaviors throughout this long line of transition that countries go through in terms of demography. So what I'm going to try to do is show you a little bit of those relationships and very quickly speculate on the future, at least 2 decades into the future. First, we'll start with mortality trends. So what we're looking at are curves that suggest trends in under 5 mortality. And Africa's story is one of change over a long period of time. We're looking at 1980 to 2010. It's not that long, but 3 decades of time. What you see here are, on the left is 4 countries. Let's see. Is it this one here?
To go forward?
Oh, no, the light. There it is. That's fine. What you see here is the continental trend in dots. And then I've just picked 4 countries which show a trend downward and with very little disturbance. So most of the countries are in that category. In the second category, what I've shown are countries that have gone through some kind of episodic disturbance. Something's happened. Rwanda is the classic case in the early 1990s. But Kenya is also a case where HIV/AIDS began to affect under 5 mortality. So what you see across those countries that have undergone a disturbance is this big episode of change and then recovery. So African countries, in terms of mortality, seem to be quite resilient. Things haven't fallen apart. In fact, even Rwanda picked up after that momentous period of conflict, internal conflict, and then sort of resumed the trend downward afterwards. Next, fertility, and instead of those two kind of categorizations, I'd like to show you in terms of regional trends. And I've picked again 3 countries that represent sort of a high trend of fertility not declining very fast, a low trend of fertility declining rapidly, a median one that was in the middle of those, and then one of importance, a country that is important. So I've done that in North Africa by showing you Egypt. But of course, what you see, just in general, is rapid or fairly rapid declines in fertility across a period. Tunisia is of course the classic case. Algeria is behind it. Tunisia went through a fertility decline where family planning was brought in about 1970s by then President Habib Bourguiba. He was quite a champion of women's rights. He established, he actually got rid of multiple marriage, polygamy. He induced women to go to school. He created laws that took off the veil. And that program was extraordinarily successful. Right now, Tunisia has a fertility rate that's lower, or about as low as the US. And the Maghreb is pretty much in that category of a relatively low fertility between 2 and 3 children per woman. Egypt is not. Egypt has come down, as you can see here, but not as far as many had hoped. You look at Southern Africa, you see a similar situation, but countries that have not gone quite as far. So you see progress in terms of fertility from very, very high levels, close to 7, and then declines that are now around 3. South Africa is below 3, but heading in the right direction. And things are changing very rapidly in Southern Africa. Across the equatorial belt, you see a different story. And this is sort of the theme of this talk, is what happened in equatorial Africa, and the answer is much less. When you look across West Africa, you see sustained high rates of fertility or fertility declines that happen more gradually and ones that stalled. That is, they got to a level around 4 and 5 children per woman, and then they stopped declining. And that's pretty much the story across equatorial Africa and Mid and East. And we can talk about individual countries as much as I know about those individual countries. But that pretty much outlines this dichotomy. Changes in the north, Arab-speaking region of Africa, changes in the southern region of Africa, and much less change in many of the demographic and educational indicators across equatorial Africa. That doesn't mean things haven't changed. You can see change has occurred. Health programs have been established. They have proliferated into the countryside. They've been much less successful at at completing their objectives. So what does that mean? That translates into population growth. That's quite extraordinary. The continent began in, let's see, this one takes you back to 1970 to a population of around 400 million. And when it ends up in this graph, it's at about 1.65 billion. The level today is probably around 1.18 billion. And you can see that there's an rapid upward trend in growth. However, you see the most rapid growth across the equatorial belt. for reasons that we just showed, because fertility remains high and has stalled in some countries. So when you look at East and West Africa, you see the largest body of population and the most rapid growth. When you look at North and Southern Africa, you see smaller increments and increments that haven't grown as much and will not be growing as much. Although the future is uncertain, particularly about in terms of Egypt's growth. But nonetheless, that's the trend. And if we look back to the 2010 revision that was done by the UN 2 years ago, you see a population growth scenario that was a little less rapid. That's been recently upgraded. It's updated to a more rapid assessment. So one of the components of that growth is urban growth, and it's very important in terms of economic trends and education, access to services, particularly health service, family planning services, and it does change things. What it is not related to, and this is a point of this graph, which I will explain, all those dots laying there, is that some of the things that you and I learned when we were going through college, perhaps, that urbanization was a function of industrialization, so you should expect countries with industrial populations to accumulate these big urbanizations. Well, that's wrong. In fact, and that's the issue with Africa. Africa is urbanizing very quickly. And what you really see when you look at country-level population growth, which is on this axis, and urban population growth, and here's the one-to-one line, you see everybody is above that level. In other words, urban growth is really a function of country-level population growth. The faster the country's growing, the more people go to the city or are born in the city, or the third component of urban population is actually the spread of cities into rural areas, the reclassification of areas. So Africa's countries are these blue dots, and because they're growing rapidly at the country level, they too are urbanizing rapidly. Does industrialization matter? Yes, it does, but to the distribution of urban population. Where industries are, that's where people will go, but in the absence of industries, people create cities, and that's what we see a great deal of in Africa. If you have been to sub-Saharan Africa, maybe the last time you went and saw some crossroads where there was somebody selling bananas or cooked chickens, that may be a city by now. That's where cities are growing, and very often the product is not a legal product, it's contraband, or just people moving through, and then people settling in to start commerce of whatever type. So basically, here's the point, is that all countries are up on that quadrant rather than below. It's not a scatter, despite the fact that urban population is defined differently in all those countries. What that translates to is growth, of course, in urban growth in the most rapidly growing regions of sub-Saharan Africa, Eastern and Western, and less so in the southern and northern regions. So, giving you that basic data about demography, about growth in urban growth and population growth in Africa, I'm going to move to age structure. What is age structure? It is the distribution of people across the ages. So what you're looking here, when you look at Tunisia, is actually two bar graphs that are placed by their side. Instead of being like this, they're placed by their side. The males on the left, the females are on the right. And the children, each one of these bars is a 5-year age group. Children, infants and toddlers are at the bottom, then 0 to 4 years old. Then on top of them are 5 to 9, On top of them are 10 to 14, and it goes all the way up the scale until we get to people who are over 100 years. So we're looking at, when you look at a pyramidal age structure like Uganda, or Nigeria, or Niger, or for that matter, Iraq or Afghanistan, or Yemen, you're looking at a country that has high fertility, large families, rapid influx into schools of a great many children, and high growth of the workforce, particularly from the bottom untrained level. And those are situations which, rather than being a threat, I know that we're talking about threats, I consider demography, particularly demographics of this type, as an extreme challenge, particularly for developing countries where they exist. So what we're talking about are situations where it's very easy to recruit people. And that's the tie that political demographers make with people who are talking or thinking and talking about terrorism and crime. That it's very difficult to extend services and maintain them in such a situation. It's very difficult to employ people. It becomes very easy then to recruit people, particularly young men, and almost exclusively young men. So what I've done in this graph, I've created the bottom axis here as seniors, 65 and older. The axis, I'm sorry, because I leave you guys out. I can't even get that. But if you look at the vertical axis over here, that's young people, 30 and younger, seniors on the bottom. And what I've done is taken all the countries of the world and thrown them on that graph. So all those black dots are the world's countries in 2010, according to their age structure. And what you can see if you follow this arc, and that arc is always present if you go however far back you go in the data, what you see is a movement of countries from very youthful populations with very high fertility and mortality rates to countries with older populations and low fertility and low mortality rates. So this transition is one that hopefully every country will go through. We suspect all countries will go through. They have been in the very high region at one time of their existence. And now they have moved, some of them, through this transition to other positions. And what one can do is actually parse out these regions in this graph. That region, the youngest region, contains countries that have a pyramidal age structure, and it contains, let's say, 80% of all civil conflicts that arise every decade occur in that little box. We know where they occur, and therefore we can look into the future and see where they are likely to occur. Can we identify what country, which specific country will fall into civil conflict, and when? No. Nonetheless, that's where they 80% occur. And interestingly, the other 20% occur in countries where there is a very youthful minority, where there is an age structure of an ethnic group that has a shape, a configuration like this. The next region is an intermediate region. Is a region that countries move through very quickly, typically, but the longer they stay there, the more they actually benefit from it. It's called the period of demographic bonus, or the demographic dividend. Many of you have heard of that. It's a period when about half of these countries become liberal democracies. That is the very highest level of democracies as judged by Freedom House's scores. And they typically undergo rapid economic growth. The third region is the one that the US and European countries are in, and many East Asian countries are in, and that is sort of a mature period when countries lose some of that demographic oomph that they had, and they have to sort of go it alone on their institutions and the education that they've created. And we're in that period right now, although we have an enormous amount of migration that we rely on. What comes next is, what comes next here is, this continues. So you see Japan, Germany, Italy, and Greece down here, and they are moving slowly into a period of a fourth, sort of a fourth quadrant, and we really don't know what's going to happen, but we can guess that that's a period of difficulties to provide people who are retiring in large numbers with benefits that have been promised by the government in particular, based upon the size of the working population. The working population, in fact, is shrinking, as you can see. So what you can see, what's to note here is this change in geometry as you go through this transition. And this is a big deal for countries. Yet we don't talk about it much. We handle them like they're anecdotes. And really there are some very big differences between age structures that affect development. So just looking at Africa, again, we see Nigeria with a very wide base, rapid workforce growth, and high rates of children moving into the school ages. Egypt is changed, but still a wide base and rapid growth, a large proportion of people moving into the workforce. Tunisia, big changes, a fertility rate about 2, as opposed to somewhat over 3 in Egypt. And what you have is this bulge that's moving up into the workforce, but behind it is a much smaller group of people who are fairly well educated. There's because their parents have been able to afford it, and the school and as well the government's been able to afford it, and so you're going to have a period following in the next 10 years where workforce challenges will actually become less. I'm trying to show that over here. Can I? You can see that in Tunisia. Smaller challenges are on their way. Good times are about to occur, at least in terms of workforce growth. And the third the fourth population pyramid is even more advanced in Tunisia. That's Mauritius. It's an island. It's behaved much more like Asia, as have Seychelles and Cape Verde as well. Small populations, well managed, fairly good governments, etc. So how does this parse out in terms of liberal democracy? And I mentioned it, that this region, as these youthful countries become a little bit older, they become intermediate, about half of them in this intermediate region acquire this designation of free, as assessed not by me, but by Freedom House. Which ones? Well, we don't know. But nonetheless, there's changes afoot, and as countries mature, at least up until this level, like Mauritius is about to become, and Mauritius is a liberal democracy, then you get to a region of a bit over 80%. You can guess that about 80% of all countries with age structures like that of the United States and of Europe, even South Korea and Taiwan, are liberal democracies. Not something trivial at all. Becomes easier to manage, maybe. We look across Africa, and we again see that those age structures that have changed are in the north, and you can see in the south. So I took the south and north. Maybe you can pick them out by yourself now, where the base is smaller. And then you look to the east and west, and what do you see? East, west, and central. You see those same pyramidal age structures, and I'll show you. I'll go through them at another time. I mean, at the end of this talk, and sort of go through history a little bit for you on a map. So this sums up the age structure and democracy, liberal democracy relationship. In fact, this curve suggests that countries at the beginning of this age structural transition have a very poor chance of A, making liberal democracy, and B, keeping it. And that's one thing. So if you look at sub-Saharan Africa, where actually countries have made very high levels of democracy, you'll notice that they don't make them for over 10 years. They come and go, as Senegal has. Nigeria was there once. Ghana has stayed, has come down a couple times, but regained it. Mali lost it. And Mali's loss is not unexpected if you think about it in this way. So if you look across this curve, what you see is Europe climbing this curve, and sub-Saharan Africa is down here, just where you'd expect it to be. So expecting liberal democracies at the stage of the age-structural transition in which most of sub-Saharan Africa is at, the equatorial belt is actually too much. We shouldn't be expecting that, even though we have a few. Ghana, Senegal is back again, Benin is there, Sierra Leone even this year. Ghana, I said, who else? Mali lost it. And of course, some of the southern African countries, South Africa and Botswana. But they're on a trend, as you will see, they're on a trend of fertility decline, age structural change, and they're likely to keep it according to this model. Okay, and to end up, I'm going to just take you through the sort of the dynamics of this youthful group. We're going to pick out this one because it's so characteristic of Africa. In 2000, every country in Africa was there, with the exception of some of the islands. And you can see them in red. But that was one place in a large arc of youthful countries that extended from Mexico and the Andes all the way across to the Philippines and to Papua New Guinea. Now, because of fertility decline, which has already occurred at the time that this map has started in some of these countries, we'll see some rapid changes. So 2000, we go to 2010, which is close to what we have now. What do we see, which should catch your eye, is the Maghreb sticking out there. And that was the basis, that change was the basis of a forecast I made in 2008, and people laughed at it, which was that look for the possibility of liberal democracy arising from 2010 to 2020 in the North African countries. So those are published. They're in Foreign Policy. I think I sent you then. People just thought that was hysterically funny at the time. So that's a possibility. Could I tell which country would make it? No, because the model isn't that specific. But for the purpose of one or two exercises, I suggested Tunisia because it's, as you saw, it's advanced. And it has this history of sort of orchestrated change, orchestrated largely by one visionary, Habib Bourguiba, but nonetheless one that is extraordinary. Okay, next, you'll also note that some of your favorite countries are out here, Afghanistan and Syria and Iraq and some of the Latin American countries. We move on to 2020. Some of those begin to disappear, particularly in Southeast Asia and Latin America and the Andes countries. And then, so that's a little in the future. And we look out to 2030, and what do we have left? And here's the news for people who are interested in Africa, is that you probably have a job for a while. But those changes are afoot, and where are they afoot? They're in North Africa, across North Africa. You can see Tunisia sticking out, advancing even further into an age structure that is very similar to the United States by 2030. Southern Africa changed dramatically, shows that it isn't an African thing. And it certainly isn't, it isn't an African thing, particularly if Africans are displaced, because the Caribbean was one of the first places to go through the age structural transition across the world after Europe. And next, this is where I'm going to end up. But you can see that there's very little left. Guatemala, Haiti's even disappeared from this map. Some of the island states that are north of Australia on their watch, the Solomons, Papua New Guinea. But those problems in the Middle East, they're not necessarily going away either. There's Afghanistan, Iraq, and you can't see it, Palestinian Authority, Yemen. They remain very youthful at that time. So with that, you get a little taste of political demography. It goes a lot further than that. There's an economic work done on this large transition, and its association with economic changes as well. But that's a little taste of it. And so just to sum, slow, halting transitions with exceptions across Africa. African countries have been remarkably resilient, particularly in terms of mortality. Their services have been established in countries where there is HIV/AIDS and there has been civil disturbances. For one reason or another, aid, their own will, they have recovered from those. And thirdly, look for that band across sub-Saharan Africa, the equatorial band, as lagging behind the North and South. Should think there should be different strategies about how those countries are dealt with, because the North and South are dramatically changing. Thank you.